The trail marker pointed left, but I swear there was no path there the day before. I've hiked this area more times than I can count. The northern Pennsylvania hardwoods are kind of my reset button. I'm 32, live alone, and work a stressful IT job in the city. When things get overwhelming, I load up my gear, drive a few hours out, and disappear for the weekend. No cell service, no people, just birdsong and trees. That's the appeal. This particular trail loop, near Pine Hollow State Park, is a favorite of mine, about 20 miles total, with a gentle elevation gain and a few good spots to camp overnight. The first day of the trip was like clockwork. I parked at the trailhead, hiked 10 miles, pitched camp beside a ridge clearing, and fell asleep to the sound of wind through the trees. The next morning, everything felt off the moment I unzipped my tent. There was a kind of hush over the forest. No birds, no rustle. The air felt heavier. I packed up quickly, trying to shake the unease. About half a mile in, I came to a trail sign that looked different. Weathered wood, the arrow carved into it, was now pointing left toward what looked like an old, barely visible path. I stopped, rubbed my eyes. I was sure this sign pointed straight the day before, but trails change. Maybe the rangers rerouted it recently and didn't update the maps. Still, that path didn't look like it got much use. It was narrow, half overgrown, but I trusted the sign. That was my first mistake. The further I walked, the darker it got. The trees pressed in tighter. I kept checking my GPS app, but by mid-morning, I had no signal. That happens out here, so I wasn't too concerned. Not at first. By noon, I knew something was wrong. The path didn't loop. It didn't bend back toward the ridge, like it should. It just kept going, deeper and deeper. The trees looked older than I remembered. Not just older, but different, thicker trunks. The bark was dark and mottled, almost bruised-looking. The light barely made it through. When I turned around to retrace my steps, the trail behind me looked nothing like what I'd just walked. No boot prints, no familiar rocks or branches I'd stepped over. It was like the forest had shifted. That's when the panic started to gnaw at me. My mouth was dry, and I realized I hadn't eaten in hours. I pulled out a granola bar with shaking hands and forced myself to chew. I kept walking, faster now, trying to find some landmark, anything. Then I heard it, movement, off to my right, a low rustling, not from wind or small critters, something heavy, deliberate. I stopped, held my breath. It stopped too. I called out, "Hello, Ranger?" No answer. I kept moving. Every so often, I'd hear it again, keeping pace with me, just beyond sight. At one point, I thought I saw a figure standing between two trees, human-shaped, tall, perfectly still. I blinked, and it was gone. By late afternoon, the trail led me into a small clearing. I sighed in relief. I recognized it. I'd seen this spot earlier, or had I? There was a red cloth tied to a branch about 6 feet up. I walked over to it. It was a torn piece of nylon, same material as my windbreaker, same color, but I hadn't lost anything. Or at least I didn't think I had. The realization hit hard. I'd passed this clearing before, maybe an hour ago. I was looping. As the sun dipped low, I made a decision. I'd camp for the night, right there, and start fresh at first light. I set up my tent fast, heart pounding, ate the rest of my food in silence. Didn't build a fire, just lay inside, knife in hand, praying morning would come quickly. It didn't, too. Around 2 a.m., something brushed against the outside of my tent. Not a branch, not the wind, a long, slow scrape across the fabric. Then the sound of footsteps, soft but steady, circling me. I held my breath, clutched the knife tighter, didn't dare move. The footsteps stopped, right at the entrance. Silence. Then very faintly, breathing. I didn't sleep, By the time dawn finally bled through the canvas, my muscles were locked, and my mind was in a fog. But outside, everything looked different. Brighter. The path beside the clearing was wider now. Recognizable. I ran. Didn't think. Just followed the trail until, maybe an hour later, I burst out onto a gravel road. Collapsed right there. A park ranger found me 20 minutes later. Said I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I tried to explain. Showed him the route I took. He frowned. Said there is no reroute. That branch of trail had been closed off for over a decade due to navigation hazards. Too many people getting turned around. No trail signs had been placed there in years. I asked about the red cloth. He didn't said answer. He just drove me back to my car and said, "Some places don't sit wanna be found. Best not to go looking again." I have instead, but I think about it. More than I should. Sometimes I catch myself staring at maps. Late at night, my hiking gear is still packed, untouched since that weekend, but I haven't thrown it out either. One day I found that same piece of red cloth in the bottom of my bag. I don't remember packing it, and sometimes, when I lie awake and the apartment goes quiet, I swear I hear those footsteps again. Just one slow circle, waiting. It kept calling my name from behind the trees, but I was hiking alone. I used to think I had a pretty good head on my shoulders. I wasn't someone who spooked easily, and I didn't buy into creepy stories or forest folklore. I liked hiking. Being alone in the woods gave me a sense of peace, something I really needed after the breakup. That's why I decided to take a solo weekend trip to a forest reserve in Oregon. I'd read about online, quiet trails, glassy lakes, miles of silence. It sounded like the reset I desperately needed. I got there Friday afternoon. The air was crisp and cool, and the leaves had just started turning. The trail registry at the ranger station showed only a handful of hikers logged in that week. I liked that. Fewer people, more space to think. I hiked 5 miles in, set up camp by a lake, and made myself a cup of tea by the water. That first night was perfect. No weird noises, no animal encounters, just the sound of wind rippling through the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, things shifted. I woke early, probably around 6, to an odd pale light filtering through the tent. When I stepped outside, I saw the fog, thick, heavy, like wet smoke curling through the trees. It hadn't been there the night before. I packed up camp, slung on my pack, and started toward the second half of the loop trail I'd planned. The fog followed. At first, it was just an eerie visual, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, trees seeming to lean in. But as the hours passed, the woods grew quieter, not the peaceful kind of quiet, muffled, like I had cotton stuffed in my ears. Birds stopped chirping. My footsteps felt too loud. I followed the trail markers, orange bands wrapped around trees every 100 feet or so, but they started getting harder to spot. The fog distorted everything. Trees blurred together. The ground felt damp and uneven. I stopped at one point, near a fallen log covered in moss, just to regroup. I took a sip of water, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and then I heard it. Samantha. My name, carried lightly, like it rode in on the fog. I spun around so fast, my boot slid in the mud. No one was there. Nothing. Just trees and more gray. I stood there, frozen, for a solid minute, convinced it was my imagination. But then it came again. Samantha. It was my mom Sep's voice. But she wasn't here. She lived 3 states away and had no idea where I was hiking that weekend. And even if she had, there was no cell signal, no GPS reception, no way she could be nearby. The voice wasn't frantic or panicked. It was calm, familiar, but it felt wrong, stretched out, off somehow, like someone trying too hard to sound soothing. I told myself, It had to be another hiker who'd seen my name on my backpack's ID tag. Maybe they were playing a prank. Maybe I was more on edge than I realized. I started walking faster. That's when the voices changed. They started switching. My sister, my ex, a college friend I hadn't seen in years. Each voice would call out, always saying the same thing. Just my name. No other words. No questions. Just Samantha. It was instead an echo. It was too clear. Too direct. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. My GPS screen was frozen, stuck on the spot I'd left hours ago. I tried turning around, retracing my steps, but the trail markers were gone, replaced with strange carvings in the bark, loops and jagged shapes, scratched and deep like claws had made them. They pulsed in and out of the fog like warnings. I didn't recognize them. They didn't feel like they belonged here. Panic took over. My breath felt thin. I walked faster, then ran. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, the voices would return, always close, always circling. As the light started to fade, I saw it, a faint glow through the trees. A tent. Relief surged through me. Maybe I'd looped back to a ranger station, or another camper. I half jogged toward it, but as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was my tent. Not a similar one. My exact tent. Same olive green color. Same broken zipper on the left flap. I stepped inside and stared at the contents. My sleeping bag rolled up just the way I'd left it. My half-full water bottle lying on its side. My paperback novel with the dog-eared corner. It was like I had never left. I stood there for a long time, just staring, trying to make sense of it. My hands trembled as I zipped the flap shut. I didn't want to be out there anymore. I curled into the sleeping bag and held my camp knife under the fabric. The voices didn't stop. All night long, they circled the tent, sometimes close, sometimes far, but never leaving. They weren't angry or aggressive. They were patient, gentle, and somehow, that was worse. Like they knew I'd break eventually. I don't remember falling asleep. At some point I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was blinking into bright sunlight. The fog was gone. I stumbled out of the tent and into a clearing I didn't recognize. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped again. Everything looked normal. And then a man-sip's voice behind me. "Hey, are you okay?" I turned. A ranger stood about 20 feet away, squinting at me. He led me back to the main trail. Turns out I was less than a mile from the campsite. Less than a mile. When we reached his truck, he pointed at my gear. "Where sipped you get that tent?" he asked. I told him it was from a store in Portland, brand new last spring. He shook his head slowly. "That model hasn't been made in like 15 years. I laughed at first. I thought he was messing with me. But then he asked, "Your name's Samantha, right?" "Yeah," I said. "I thought so," he replied. "I heard it all morning, out in the trees. That sip's how I found you." I stared at him. "Heard me. I wasn't set calling." "I know," he said. "But someone was. I haven't been back to that forest since. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, when I dream, I hear them again. Those voices in the fog, always calm, always calm. Just my name, over and over again." The fire in the distance burned all night. But when we got there in the morning, the forest was untouched. We weren't exactly seasoned campers, but we knew our way around the woods well enough to be confident. Me, Matt, and Evan, we'd done this kind of weekend trip a few times a year, usually somewhere a little off-grid, someplace where the silence gets thick and you can actually hear your own heartbeat. This time, it was the Adirondacks. We picked a remote primitive site a few miles from the main campground. No cell service, no trails packed with tourists, just trees, firewood, and time. We parked the car just before noon on Friday. strapped on our packs, and started hiking in. The air was cool, sharp, laced with pine. It felt like the kind of place where nothing ever really changed. We followed a barely marked trail that twisted deeper and deeper into dense hardwoods, then finally opened into a hollow near a slope. Quiet, secluded, perfect. We pitched our tents and set up camp. It was the kind of evening you romanticize later. Cheap beer cracked open beside the fire, smoke rising into the tree canopy, someone playing bad music on a Bluetooth speaker with spotty reception. We told the same stories we always told, laughed too hard, ate half-charred hot dogs. Everything felt familiar. Until it didn't. It was a little after 2 a.m. when things started to shift. We just started dousing the fire and getting ready to crash when Evan stopped mid-sentence and pointed out past the tree line. "Do you guys see that?" At first, I thought he was messing with us. But there it was, a faint, distant orange glow through the branches. About a mile off, down the ridge, it looked like a fire. Not flickering like a campfire usually does, but steady, constant. "Probably another group camping deeper in," I said. But Evan didn't look convinced, and the longer we all stood there staring, the more off it felt. There was no smoke, no sound, no movement, just this flat, unwavering orange light, glowing through the dark like it had been painted there. Matt wanted to check it out right away, but I told him it wasn't smart to stumble around unfamiliar terrain at night. Slopes were steep out here. One wrong step, and you'd end up with a broken ankle, or worse. So we agreed to wait until morning. But none of us slept well. We took turns tossing, listening. That light never dimmed. It never shifted. Just sat there all night, like it was waiting. At first light, we geared up and headed toward it. Took us over 2 hours of climbing, backtracking, and pushing through thick underbrush to get close to where we'd seen the glow. When we finally crested the ridge and reached the clearing, all three of us stopped dead. There was nothing. No fire pit, no scorched earth, no signs of another campsite. The clearing wasn't even trampled. In fact, the ground was damp, soft from last week's rain. If anyone had been here, there'd be footprints. Ash, trash, something. But there was nothing. It was untouched. Evan swore we were in the right place. We triple-checked with the compass. The terrain matched up perfectly. We weren't lost. The fire we saw had been right here. I wanted to laugh it off. Say maybe we'd misjudged the distance. Maybe it was further out, and we'd just come up short. But even that didn't sit right. There was no other glow, no sign of anything. The woods were still. We decided to head back. None of us talked much during the hike. You'd think a day hike through mountain woods would be beautiful, peaceful, but everything felt a little too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our boots crunching the dirt and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Then, as we were crossing a dry stream bed, Evan suddenly yelped and stumbled forward. "Something cut me," he said, clutching his hand. We looked down and saw something half buried in the earth, a rusted metal edge jutting out near a fallen branch. We cleared the dirt and pulled it free. It was an old lantern, burnt and scorched. The glass long gone, the metal blackened like it had seen a serious fire. It didn't look like it had been dropped recently. This thing had been here a while. Dylan turned it over in his hands and said, "Maybe that was it?" But even as the words left his mouth, I could see he didn't believe it. None of us did. That little relic couldn't have produced the glow we saw, not across that distance, not for hours, and certainly not so perfectly stationary and silent. That night, we didn't bother lighting a big fire. We sat around eating dry snacks, barely speaking. The woods felt different, like they were listening. We tried joking to shake the tension, but the laughter didn't stick. By the time the sun dipped below the ridge, we all had our heads on a swivel. I don't think any of us wanted to admit it. But we were waiting, watching. Sure enough, Just after midnight, the glow came back. But this time, it wasn't a mile away. It was closer, much closer. Through the trees, maybe a few hundred yards past the edge of our camp, that same orange hue pulsed like a heartbeat. Still no flicker. Still no movement. Just that steady, impossible light. We didn't argue this time. We started packing immediately. Threw our gear together in silence, barely stopping to check what we stuffed into our packs. Within 20 minutes, we were hiking out, headlamps cutting narrow cones through the dark. We didn't talk on the trail, just kept moving, each of us watching the shadows behind us. When we got to the car and finally hit the paved road, the silence broke. Evan pulled out the GPS tracker he'd been using to log our route, trying to make sense of it all. He stared at the screen for a long time, then looked at us. "There's steps, no data from yesterday," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it didn't sat log anything after we left camp yesterday morning. Nothing from the hike to the clearing, or the trip back." Matt leaned over. "There's sips something there." Evan turned the screen. There was only one recorded path, a single straight line, from the trailhead, directly to the site where we'd seen the fire, and nothing else. We drove the rest of the way in silence. I'd been camping since then, but never without checking for weird lights, and never again in the Adirondacks. Because sometimes I still see it, out the corner of my eye on night hikes. That same glow, still, silent, watching,